He's an activist based in the Bronx. He's a member of the Schiller Institute and a staffer for Diane Sare, and she's running against New York Governor Kirsten Gillibrand as an independent. He has recently confronted New York-based politicians about their support for the Ukraine war and to demand accountability for the Biden administration for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. Please welcome Jose Vega. Jose, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jimmy.
So now I want to just show people, here you are confronting Hakeem Jeffries, who's the new leader of the Democrats in the House, over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline revelations. I asked him to inquire. Okay, so just if people don't know, the Nord Stream pipeline is a pipeline from Russia to Germany. It's going to bring energy. And of course, we don't want Germany and Russia coming together because of our economic hegemony that we want to impose. And so the United States blew up that pipeline. So that's what this war in Ukraine is all about. It's not about saving people in Ukraine. It's about economics, like it always is, right? And so here you are confronting. Now, the Democrats are all pretending, and everybody in corporate media is pretending that the Ukraine war is just one day Putin woke up and invaded Ukraine. They don't tell you in 2014 the CIA and the Nazis in Ukraine overthrew their democratically elected president because he was friendlier economically to Russia than the European Union. And then the people in the eastern part of the country, Ukraine, didn't want to go along with the coup. And so they just started shelling them, meaning the Nazi battalion, the Azov battalion, started shelling the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the eastern part of Ukraine, and they did it for 8 years. There was a peace agreement. They still did it. There was a peace agreement that was called the Minsk Accord, supposed to be enforced by Germany and France. It wasn't. So they killed 16,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians, their own government, in the eastern part of the... So they did that for 8 years. Finally, after all the threats to put Ukraine into NATO and arming NATO and Russia invaded. So it was provoked. And so that's what Democrats won't tell you about Ukraine. And then we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and we're the ones who are sabotaging the peace talks, meaning the United States and NATO. There was already a peace agreement a year ago in March, and then NATO killed it, right? And Nazis also killed it in Ukraine. They said that the leader of the Right Guard, I think that's what they call it, he said that if Zelensky does peace, that he will be hanging from a tree in downtown Kiev. So that's what's going on here. There's people who are using Ukrainians as cannon fodder for an economic war. It's got nothing to do with what's actually happening in Ukraine. It's got everything else to do with Russia and Germany and us selling more liquefied natural gas to Europe. 40% of Europe's energy comes from Russia. So that's the thumbnail sketch on what happened for real in Ukraine. And so now here you are, you're going to confront Hakeem Jeffries, who's the newly elected leader of the Democrats in the House. And let's remember how you get to be a leader. Hakeem Jeffries is a leader not because he's a leader or because he has bright ideas. He's a leader because he is the biggest, most corrupted person right now next to Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives as a Democrat. He gets the most money from Wall Street, the most money from the military-industrial complex and all corporations, and they know that he's the most corrupted, so they give him all the money, and then he gives that money to the other members of the House so they can go run their elections, and then they owe him a favor, and the favor is you have to vote for me as leader. So that's why we get the leaders we are, not because they're leaders, but because they're the most corrupted pieces of it in the whole goddamn country. And so he's going to confront that guy right now over them lying about Ukraine, the Nord Stream pipeline.
UN Security Council had a meeting yesterday, and Ray McGovern spoke to it. He is a former member of the CIA, and he testified in support of Seymour Hersh's article on the United States bombing Nord Stream pipeline. If it is proven that the United States bombed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, as has been asserted by Seymour Hersh and his article, will you call for the United States to acknowledge and admit that that was an act of war against Germany and Russia? And I'm asking this because this may be the only way to prevent the rest of us from being killed in a thermonuclear war. And I don't want to be fried. Don't you think the media should be reporting on whether or not this is true? And don't you think you should be inquiring into whether or not this is true?
Well, thank you for the question. One, I've got no information to suggest that the United States was involved in bombing the Nord Stream pipeline.
Because you weren't briefed on it.
Sir, you got your chance to ask a question.
You weren't given information because he explicitly says you weren't briefed on it. Shouldn't you inquire?
So here's what I'll say about, I think, President Biden's leadership generally as it relates to the Ukraine and Russia.
We committed an act of war. What are you doing to respond to that? We have to hold Biden accountable. Listen, you're from Brooklyn, right? You know when to call bullshit when you see it. So do I. This is bullshit right now. And I see what's happening right now. That does not silence me. You can hear me right now. I want you to say something about the bombing, because we're all going to die from a nuclear war right now unless you stop it and you at least put and inquire into whether or not it's true. This war in Ukraine is going to leave us all dead. So what are you going to do? Because you need to inquire. I'm a New Yorker too.
Here's what I'll say.
Say it.
We're going to continue to stand with the Ukrainian people.
That's fucking bullshit. Do not do that. You will end us all dead.
In this war against
We need peace. We need talks. Why are you sabotaging talks? Do not put your hands on me. We need peace talks. I am not going to take this. We need peace talks. You are leaving. Listen. Did you even read the allegations?
It's a battle between
how about
truth
accountability?
and propaganda,
Not airheadedness.
and it's a battle between
how
tyranny
about
and
bridges,
freedom.
not bombs?
And democracy,
okay. How about
truth, and
conversations,
freedom will
not
prevail. And the
cremation?
United States is going to help make sure
Diplomacy,
that happens.
not destruction. How about that?
I want to ask you to join me.
You goddamn airhead, you're going to kill us all. I don't want to die in a goddamn nuclear war, and nobody does.
So that was well done. And what's amazing to me is the other people that sit around. So what was your let me just throw it to you. Are you kind of amazed at the other people's lack of urgency over this?
Of course I am. I think, I will say there was one kid, a blonde kid, maybe he was like 18, 19 years old, who was cheering me on. He was like my number one supporter there. He was like, yeah, keep going. And that guy kept motivating me. And when I was escorted out, so was he. He was also escorted out too. And he was just there. He wasn't even like with me or anything. He wasn't with my folks. He just was just happy that somebody brought this up. And so, look, Jimmy, I think you do a good job in informing your audience. That little thumbnail sketch you gave in the very beginning. Hey, if you're not sure how we got into this war, let me give you a 60-second wrap up. And I did just want to add one quick thing to that, which is, back in 2022, June, the U.S. Government Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the Helsinki Commission, they had a live stream seminar talking about decolonizing Russia, a moral and strategic imperative. And this straight up called for a piece-by-piece dismemberment of Russia, breaking away as many 10 regions in effect, leaving only a tiny hub in Western Russia. This is up on YouTube, right? These are U.S. officials talking about how we're going to break up and dismantle Russia once we finish what we're doing in Ukraine. And so, I think that this is exactly what we need to keep doing is informing people and informing the population of what's going on. And I also don't hold it against them because, hey, our neighbors are brainwashed. I don't hate my neighbor. I love my neighbor.
So that's all they have, Jose, is narrative control. And that's what's going on. And it's amazing to see it happen. Now, this is at least the third or fourth time in my lifetime. It happened with the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, Libya, and then for 20 years in Afghanistan, and of course, Syria, and now Ukraine. So this would be the sixth time. And what happens in every war is that the corporate media, which is funded by the military-industrial complex in Wall Street, they get their talking heads, people like Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Anderson Cooper, Sean Hannity, and they get them to go on television and lie, a direct lie about the Ukraine war, which was so frustrating when that tool on Bill Maher asked Russell Brand for one example. I could give you for every war, they all go on and lie about it. Every war. They unknowingly lie. There's no way I know more about what's happening in Ukraine than Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes. She's a Rhodes Scholar. He's a certified nerd. And there's no way that I know more about it than them. They know more about it than me, and they're lying on purpose. And so the American people, as my friend Nick Cruz says, are the most propagandized people in the world. And what's worse is they don't know that they are. At least people when they lived in the Soviet Union and the people in China, they know that the government is propagandizing them, and they knew that the news wasn't real. Well, people in the United States think that the news is real. They think that a bunch of billionaires got together to hire a bunch of millionaires to tell us the truth. That's not what's happening. And so that's why this show exists, which is why it gets suppressed, right? When we first started doing this show, our videos used to appear on the home splash page of YouTube all the time. Not anymore. They're suppressing independent news because we tell the truth about, COVID, lockdowns, vaccines. We tell the truth about war. And that's the biggest thing you can't tell the truth about is the war. And so that's why my Wikipedia page looks like it, because we tell the truth. And as soon as you tell the truth about the Iraq War, war, Libya, Syria, the BS gas attacks, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine or Venezuela, you're immediately called a conspiracy theorist. That's what the establishment does. They've been doing it since they killed Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and RFK Jr. Ever since then, if you got onto their conspiracies, they call you a conspiracy nut. And that's all they have left is narrative control. And so that's great. What you're doing is you're raising awareness and raising consciousness about what's happening, and in a real radical way, which we need way more of that. Why do you think it is? First of all, why is it just you and your fellow LaRouches challenging politicians about their support for funding of Ukraine war? Where is the anti-war left, do you think?
Well, I think, in the beginning, it was definitely just me and my friends. And also recently, it's been me and my friends, actually. Okay, that is a very fair characterization. There were some people who were not associated with me in the period between October and November when we first did the AOC intervention. But honestly, I think the reason why is because, a lot of the reason of why I know what I know and why I stand up the way I do has to do with my organization. It has to do with the fact that I come from this organization that has 50 years of experience going after, people like Henry Kissinger, George H. Bush, Robert Mueller. All of these people that are talked about today as the enemies were exposed way back when in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. We did the work on that. And, I'm proud to say I come from people and members and people like Diane Sayre, who's running for Senate here against Kirsten Gillibrand. As an independent candidate, they've shown bravery and courage to stand up against the war machine. And I'm proud to say I fall next in line in that generation. And so, but really, I want to inspire other people to stand up and do the same thing that I'm doing. And so, myself and the People's Party have just launched a series on rageagainstthewarmachine.com. People can go to the website. People can see it on my Twitter, where you can learn how to intervene. We break it down step by step. We have a guide there, and the first Zoom class will be on Wednesday. It'll be myself and Nick Brana and Kynan Thistlethwaite, who's also been a part of these interventions, where we'll take your questions and we'll walk you through our thought process approaching an intervention and how to do one yourself. Because look, this isn't about you. This isn't about trying to get exposure. This isn't about trying to get followers. You're trying to expose an injustice here. I mean, look what just happened with this bill that Matt Gaetz introduced with Syria, right? Matt Gaetz introduces this bill where he says, look, we never authorized troops to be there, right? There's been no congressional authorization. You can think whatever you want about Assad. We never went through the congressional process. And guess what? It gets voted down, right? 300 votes to 150 votes or so, something like that, right? I mean, it's absurd that we're there. But honestly, it's a good start because now we know where people stand on that issue. And now we know where we can go moving forward. And I do want to put this out publicly. Matt Gaetz, I want to work with you on the anti-war movement. I want to work with you to get us out of all these countries that you say, and I definitely want to get us out of Ukraine.
I agree with you. Now, Matt Gaetz does not agree with you on a lot of other issues, like especially, I don't think he agrees with you on LGBTQ issues. And so how do you reconcile that? A lot of people from Code Pink wouldn't come to the Rage Against the War Machine rally because they disagreed with the LGBTQ views of some of the speakers. And what do you say to that? People know what I say about it.
I think it's a real American principle, actually, to work with people you disagree on. Because, look, back during the American Revolution, when they were drafting up the Constitution, they put all that to the side first and said, listen, we got to get the British out of here. We have to get the colonizers out of here. We got to get the oppressors out of here first, right? Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton hated each other, right? All these founding fathers would argue and debate, and slavery was also like a hot topic. Gouverneur Morris, one of our founding fathers, was like anti-slavery. Alexander Hamilton was too. Other people were not, right? And so they had to make these concessions. But think about that for a second, right? They put aside their differences and said, you know what? We have a common enemy right now. We can argue about how we run the country afterwards. But for today, like coming back to today, we are on the verge of thermonuclear war. I don't care who you are, right? I want you to be alive. I want the opposition to be alive that I can argue with. And so if we can come together on stopping these forever wars that will lead us into nuclear war, I'll work with anyone. I don't care who you are. And then I will debate Matt Gaetz on trans rights, LGBTQ plus IA, on China, on whatever. And I think because he's an anti-China war hawk, in dismantling the wars in Syria and in other places and in Ukraine, he's going to learn that the military-industrial complex is working to get us into a war with China also.
So how did you get into the LaRouche organization, right? So tell us about it, because I don't know much about it, but I know it gets a lot of bad press, right? It gets smeared as so. What are the things they usually criticize LaRouche about, and how do you respond to it?
One of the things he gets criticized for, I think, is we often get the term cult leader, that he's a cult, that we're a cult, and that, we're a conspiracy theorist, the original conspiracy theorist. That's what Rachel Maddow called us when she was going after the Rage Against. That
the biggest conspiracy theorist in my life is Rachel Maddow. There's no crazier conspiracy theorist, and she tops Alex Jones, and that's hard to do. And she did it. And so that's great. So go ahead.
I would say this, I never spoke to Lyndon LaRouche, maybe like once, I think, and this was like on a Skype call a long time ago. I'm inspired by what his wife does nowadays, and what his wife does is pretty much like a progression of what Lyndon LaRouche was doing, which is this. You can respect mutual sovereignty amongst nations. You don't have to fight each other. In fact, you can work with each other, right? She has this idea called the 10 principles, where you can work with other nations, collaborate with other nations. You can have mutually beneficial trade. You can have mutually beneficial development and technology, right? And so Helga Zepp LaRouche, his wife, has been leading. She founded the Schiller Institute. And, her policies have been adopted around the world. Like China, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, that has a lot of contribution to what Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp LaRouche did when they crafted the Silk Road Initiative. It goes way back to 1978. We had this idea of an international development bank, a bank that lends out money for stuff like infrastructure, for clean water, for advancements in like schools and education and medicine and research, right? And so I came around because of that. Look, I come from the South Bronx. My ceiling had collapsed in because of sewage water. And the landlord said, well, you know what? Go fuck yourself. Let the fucking thing collapse. We will rip up the lease and you can just go. And I was homeless for like 3 months. This happened when I was like 20 years old. And at the time I was associating with the LaRouche organization. I realized, look, everybody knows what the problem is. But what is the solution? What do you replace the problem with? And so you have to think about it from a top-down level. And so, not only do we know the problem inside and out, and we've also been on the forefront of proposing a solution to replace it. Once you get rid of a cancer in a person, that doesn't guarantee their survival long term. You still got to make sure they eat. You still got to make sure that they have somewhere to live and they have clothes. But getting rid of the cancer is a good start to survivability, and we apply that to government too. Get rid of the corruption and replace it with something that'll benefit all of mankind.
If you want to see my stand-up special, become a member at jimmydore.com. It's only $10, and come see our live stand-up comedy in Los Angeles, Palm Springs, Milwaukee, St. Paul, Honolulu, Northampton, Massachusetts, Syracuse, Cohoes, New York, Hartford, and more.